Folks, I'm going to do a pretty quick rant about the new Super Nintendo Classic Micro Miniature Edition Retro Revivalist console, whatever you want to call it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rank the games in order from least to greatest, in my humble opinion. But first, I got to go on my little rant about this. Now, personally, I think it's kind of a con, because even though you got some really good games on here, there's 21, I'd say about 15 of them are legitimately great. The fact of the matter is, you can play these games anytime you want. You don't even need to download anything. You don't even need to have ROM files anymore because they're all playable on in-browser emulators. There are so many websites you can go to. Now, I have noticed, kind of oddly enough, that a lot of the sites that used to have these games, for whatever reason, like a lot of these games that are featured on this and the precursor, the NES Mini Classic thing, all of a sudden those games are missing. But they have everything else, but just these games. I guess they got a cease and desist letter from Nintendo and they're going to put the hammer down. But like I said, I mean, unless you're just like a huge super nerd or you have way too much money to spend, this whole thing's kind of pointless. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, we're living in an era where you can pretty much put the entire Super Nintendo library and the Super Famicom library on one jump drive. I mean, that's entirely possible. So if they're going to charge you $80 to play 20 games that you can play literally online for free right now with save states and all the other cool upgrades, I mean, that's just kind of extortion. But then again, the fact of the matter is this thing's going to be a hot seller, in part because Nintendo's doing like an intentional shortage. They do that a lot. The fact that this thing is like a hotter seller than the Nintendo Switch, their current console, tells you everything you need to know about what Nintendo's doing these days. They're caught in the past, they're stuck in the past, and I'm going to guess we're probably about, I don't know, 4 or maybe 5 years from these people getting Sega. So enjoy Nintendo as a first party while you can, because this is definitely emblematic that the good times are about to end. Alright, so I'm going to swig a coffee real quick. And just go through all 21 games. We're going from least to greatest. I'll give you my very quick thoughts on it, and we can move from there. Alright, so number 21 on this list, my pick for the worst game on the set. I'm going to go with Star Fox. Star Fox, you know, admittedly, it's more of a tech demo than a game. It's a title that came out, they're trying to pimp the Super FX chip. And there were a couple of different games that came out with the Super FX chip that people have totally forgotten about, like Stunt Race, which really weren't good at all. But the gimmick here is you can have polygonal graphics on a 16-bit cartridge, which at the time was really groundbreaking. Except for the fact that the Atari Lynx already did pseudo-polygonal graphics, and that was a handheld that came out in 1989. So even as like a technological feat, I think this game is vastly overrated. The graphics are fugly, the gameplay is pretty iffy, and it's just a vastly overrated game. I really can't recommend it. I mean, you can play it, it's kind of sort of fun, but there are way better games in the genre out there. Not only on the Super Nintendo, but on competing consoles from the same time frame. Alright, number 20, I'm going to go with Kirby's Dream Course, which is, I mean, it's just basically another golf variation. It's got some cool physics, but the level design is pretty boring. The multiplayer is not that great. Just, you know, not really that noteworthy. In my humble opinions, it is what it is, and that's it. Alright, so that's number 20. I'm going to go to, for number 19 on my list is going to be, what am I going to pick here? I'm going to go with Super Punch-Out. Okay, Super Punch-Out, the original Punch-Out, Mike Tyson Punch-Out on the NES, great game, all-time masterpiece. This one, they really screwed the pooch because it's not really a boxing game. I mean, it's a game where they don't have any of the same really great ethnic stereotypes in the first game. Now you have guys going in there like dressed like hillbillies. There's one dude who kicks you. It's a boxing game and there's like a kickboxer you have to fight. Like, what the hell is this? You know, I thought it was a really just vastly overrated game back in the day. I don't like the anime style. The controls are a little bit clunky, and it's just nowhere near as much fun as the original. And there are way better boxing games out there, so really no point in playing this one whatsoever. Alright, at 18 I'm going to go with F-Zero, and F-Zero was one of the very first games that came out on Super Nintendo, and really the entire, I think, hook of the game, we were trying to show the Mode 7 effects off. Basically the scaling in this one, the draw-in, where, you know, you'd look at the horizon and it'd slowly come towards you, which is something the Genesis really couldn't do all that well. So again, it's kind of that whole Star Fox realm where it's really more about showing off the tech and actually giving you a really solid game. And while I do think this is better than Star Fox, I mean, it's certainly playable. The graphics don't hold up. The levels design is really repetitive. Uh, the controls really aren't the best. There's way better racing games on the console. And I don't know, it just doesn't hold up at all. I mean, it barely held up back then as a glorified tech demo, and today it certainly isn't anywhere near as good as reputed to be. So I say pass along. The only thing that's really notable about this is kind of the precursor to Mario Kart. Without this game, we wouldn't have basically the engine for that. So it's basically just a footnote. It's a footnote game that leads to a better game. We'll get to that in just a bit. Alright, so that's 18. For number 17, I'm going to go 21, 20, okay, 17. I'm going to go with Donkey Kong Country. And here's the thing about Donkey Kong Country. This was a game when it originally came out, people are revisionists. Back in the day, people were saying this game was an all-time masterpiece. Like EGM was giving it 10s, and, you know, Nintendo Power was like, this is the best video game ever made. And now, because, you know, we're all retconning everything, primarily because Rarewin worked for Microsoft and Nintendo fans are butthurt, all of a sudden you saw like this sudden sea change where like around the 2000s, like 2000, we were like, well, maybe Donkey Kong Country wasn't that great. It's an overrated game, you know, it's just another boring, you know, fetch quest platformer. When, you know, 5 years earlier they're saying it's the best thing since sliced bread. So, I mean, it's really cool to kind of hate on Donkey Kong Country now. To be honest with you, I think it's kind of a humdrum platformer. I mean, the graphics, I think, is still pretty good. The core gameplay in this one, I think, is a little bit more refined in the sequels. It had some cool parts you could ride the animals, but overall, just as a overall platformer, it's a little bit on the ho-hum side. Coming in at, okay, that was 18, 17, Yoshi's Island. Now, this is a game that a lot of people consider to be one of the greatest platformers of all time. I consider it to be one of the most annoying games of all time. I really hate Nintendo for the design choice in this one of having that crying Mario baby, which is just the worst sound in the history of the world. That is just absolutely, utterly annoying. And I wasn't a big fan of the level design in this one either. I mean, the graphics were too pastel, and there were just too many neat game mechanics, like where you had to aim with the reticle to shoot things. It just didn't feel like Mario. Yeah, I think some people really love it and think it's one of the best games ever made, and then there are people like me with common sense who are like, okay, yes, this is a huge step down from Super Mario World. I got nothing to say. It's a vastly, vastly overrated game, and I'll just leave it at that. Alright, so that is my 21, 20, 19, 18, 17. Okay, that's 16, I believe. Going up for 15, Star Fox 2. Now, Star Fox 2 is an interesting game because it's a game that was released, I believe, in Europe, but it never got a release in the US. And I think that's kind of a shame because this one is way, way, way better than the first Star Fox game. Primarily for a lot of reasons. Number one, the graphics are better. They kind of refine the polygonal stuff. The gameplay is just better. And there's more character design, so it actually has more of an adventure-based component because there are parts earlier in the game where you can actually get out of your fighter and like walk around this little mech thing and do some exploration. The lock-on targeting is still pretty crappy. Some of the boss fights are a little bit underwhelming, but all in all, it's a much, much, much improved game. Not as good as the Nintendo 64 game, but much, much, much better than the original Star Fox. So if you haven't got around to playing it before, it's probably not worth spending $80 just to play this, but all in all, a pretty good game. Then again, I've been playing on the ROMs for like the last 5 years, so it's nothing new to me, but it's pretty interesting. It's a good game. It's very, very good. One of the better sequels to come out on the Super Nintendo. Alright, so that is... Okay, where are we on this list? I'm totally losing pace. Alright, well, you just follow the numbers. Up next on the countdown, now I think we're finally getting into the games that are like legitimately really, really good. I'm going to go with Kirby Superstar for the next on the countdown. Basically, it's 8 games in one. And there's actually a lot of replay value to this one. I think some of the mini games, especially competitive ones like with the sword and hitting the sandbag, really overrated. But the actual core gameplay where you're doing like a remake of Dreamland and you have Milky Way Wishes, which is like an entirely like full-length game as a mini game, is pretty good. So if you haven't played that, there's a lot of replay value there. Next, I'm going to go with Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, primarily because Super Street Fighter 2, which came out after this one, is, to me, the definitive version of Street Fighter 2. And what's really weird is the Japanese version of the Super Nintendo mini console actually got this game, and we didn't. Some people say Street Fighter 2 Turbo is better than Super Street Fighter 2, the new challengers, but those people are on crack. Don't listen to them. But it's still a fun game. I mean, you play as M. Bison and Balrog and all the other bosses from the original game, and it does have a quicker pace, which is fun. Some slightly altered moves for it. So, yeah, in the Pantheon, it's better than the original Street Fighter 2, but not as good as Super Street Fighter 2. But then again, you already knew that. Moving along. Next on the list, as far as the best games on this countdown, I'm going to go with Super Mario World. You know, what can I say? It's a great packing game, but in hindsight, this game is just preposterously easy. It's so simple. You can literally beat the entire game in one sitting now, like 2 hours maybe. You can just fly through it. And, I mean, there are some cool things, like if you beat the game and you unlock all the unlockables, you can, see the characters have, like, their heads turned into pumpkins. There's sorts of neat tricks in there, here and there. So, I mean, it's a very, very, very good game, a great platformer, but certainly not the best platformer on the Super Nintendo. And most certainly not the best Super Mario game, as you'll soon see on the entire Super Nintendo Pantheon, and by proxy, this set. Alright, next up, I'm going to go with Super Mario Kart. Really, really great multiplayer game. I think a lot of people kind of sleep on that, though. They don't really take into consideration just how entertaining this game is. It's not just the racing, you got the competitive head-to-head stuff, which is like an early version of like deathmatch gaming. I mean, that's basically what it was. You have the balloons and stuff, you're running around trying to shoot each other. I mean, it's good old-fashioned first-person shooter death mode match in a Super Nintendo game from 1992. Alright, you don't really have to say anything more about this game. Instant, super accessible, easy controls, pick up and play, lots of variety. Just a fun game. It was fun back then. It's still fun now. If you haven't played it, you're a dork. Moving along, I think the next one I'm going to do is going to be Mega Man X. Now, personally, I like the mainstream Mega Man series, the original, a whole lot more. Like, by the time we got to Mega Man 7 and Mega Man 8, I think I like those more than I did this particular Mega Man X series. And honestly, I think Mega Man X3 and also Mega Man and Bass, or the one game that never came to the US from the Mega Man X series, was really, really great and better than this one. But all things considered, this is still a really, really fun game. You can do the power slide, you can charge up shots. I'm still a little iffy about renaming all the characters after animals as opposed to insert gimmick here, man. But I mean, come on, it's Capcom. You know what to expect here. Great graphics, great music, very solid platforming action gameplay. I really like it. Not the best in the series, but still, you'll get a lot of hours of enjoyment out of it. Alright, next up. On the list, I'm going to go with Super Ghouls and Ghosts. And frankly, I've always preferred Ghouls and Ghosts on the Sega Genesis to this one. But still, it's a fun game. It's hard as hell, great character design. The double jump is awesome. I love having that game mechanic in there. Really, really great characters. I mean, the character design is great. Lots of replay value, and you really got to beat the game twice. It's so much fun that you won't complain about it. This is a hardcore gamer's game, just tough as nails, old school action platforming. I love it. If you don't love it, you're a loser. Alright, moving along from there, next one on the list, Super Metroid. A game considered... No, wait, hold on, I'm going to do Super Metroid. Okay, I'm going to do Legend of Zelda. Okay, here's the thing about Zelda. A lot of people say this is not only the best Zelda game in the entire franchise, but the best video game ever made. Yeah, I'm going to disagree with that, because I don't even think it's the best Zelda-type game on the entire platform. Certainly not the best game in the overall series. I think the Game Boy games later on, the Minish Cap DX and Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons, are the absolute highlight of the franchise. That's just me, though. And I mean, this is a very, very, very good game. I mean, great visuals, great music, really well-paced story. I mean, for its time, it's really, really good, but there are some detractions. Like, there are too many fetch quests. There are some parts in the game where, I mean, it's just preposterous, like where you have to use the mirror and stand in a specific place, and you have to go talk to the furries. I mean, it's not really what you want, and I think a lot of the dungeons are a little bit easy, and the final boss fight against Ganon is kind of a letdown. But, I mean, still, it's a great game, just not the greatest that everybody keeps telling you it is, and not even the greatest action-adventure game of its type on Super Nintendo. Alright, now we're going to talk about Super Metroid. Here's another game where people talk about it like it's, the best video game ever made in the history of anything, and it's very, very good. It's got a great pace, great visuals, a good story, very atmospheric. but it's got problems. There's way too much backtracking going on in this game, and the controls are iffy. I mean, the platforming, there's just something clunky about it. Like when you're trying to jump, it just feels too weighted. It's hard to angle your shots. It's just not optimal. And I also think the pacing of the game, I mean, it was cool back in the day where, you know, each like screen felt like a miniature like scene in a movie. I mean, that was cool back then, but now just the setup and the pace of the game is just so stilted that I don't know, it just kind of breaks up the game. It kind of becomes monotonous. It takes you out of the experience. But all I had to say, still a great game, one of the best action platformers 16-bit era for sure, but again, not as great as you've heard. Alright, so after that, those were like the really, really good games. They're talking about the absolute great games where if you don't play them, you're a loser. These are like some of my favorite games ever made, ever. Moving along there, we're going to go to Secret of Mana. And Secret of Mana, to me, is a way better Zelda game than A Link to the Past. Hands down. Why? Because it's multiplayer Zelda. It's better than the Four Swords Adventures came out a couple years back. It's basically what it is. It's multiplayer Zelda. Up to 3 people can play. Really good dungeon design, great enemies, beautiful music, absolutely beautiful animations, an absolute hoot and a half to play. There are not a lot of games like this available on the Super Nintendo or the Genesis, and if you never played it, you know what you're missing. Now, naturally, I do think the sequel, Seiken Densetsu 2, or Seiken Densetsu 3, whatever it's called, it's the 3rd game of the Secret of Mana series, which never actually came to the US, it was a Japanese exclusive, would have been a better selection. But yeah, I'm not going to complain about this one. It's a really good game. Oh, and for those of you that don't know, you know what the first game in this series was? Final Fantasy Adventure on the Game Boy. So, how about that? You learn something new every day. I'm a huge fan of all 3 of those games. They're great. You should play the entire franchise. Alright, and moving along from there, I'm going to pick, which one I'll go with? Super Castlevania 4, great game from Konami. And the thing is, as good as this game is, it's probably still only like the 3rd best Castlevania game in the 16-bit era. Rondo Blood on the TurboGrafx is still the best, and Bloodlines I just think is superior, but still this is just a great game. I mean, in a way, it's kind of like an unofficial sequel to Bionic Commando, on top of being just a really great update to the Castlevania mythos. Incredibly great gameplay, super visuals, just really fun music, terrific controls, and it's one of those games where it's using like the rotational screens. It is a very, very early Super Nintendo game, and they all had hard-on for the Mode 7 effects. Some of the better Mode 7 implementation in this game than I think in a lot of other games that came before and after it. It's just a fun, awesome game. Getting back to the core roots of one of my favorite franchises ever. I love it. Moving along, we're almost at the end of the countdown here. Contra 3. I think this is number 4 in case you haven't been paying attention. What can I say? The best multiplayer action game on the entire Super Nintendo, bar none. I mean, really, what more can be said about this game? It's fast, it's furious, the entire thing can be beaten in 30 minutes, but it's just so much fun to want to play it over and over again. Probably the best pure blastathon available on the entire Super Nintendo. Although, when you look at the release and the set list here, you gotta wonder, where are the shoot-'em-ups? I mean, there are a lot of great games in that genre that never made it onto this list. There's no UN Squadron, there's no Space Megaforce, you don't even have any top-down shooters like Zombies Ate My Neighbors, which would have been excellent. But even then, I still think this is one of the top 10 Super Nintendo games ever made. Without question, play it, you'll love it, it's fantastic. Though I do think hardcore on the Genesis is better, just have that officially stated. Alright, number 3. Super Mario RPG, the best Super Mario game in the 16-bit era, wasn't even like a traditional platformer. Wasn't even technically made by Nintendo. Just a really, really great platformer, RPG hybrid. Great visuals, great music, a great story, and I've always thought Smithy was a way better villain than Bowser anyway. There's been a lot of Super Mario RPG games over the years. This is still the best one. Like, it's not even just amazing to me they can make like 20 of them and never actually improve upon this. You know, it came out in 1996, arguably the last truly great game for the Super Nintendo. It's fantastic. Even if you're not like a hardcore RPG fan, you'll probably love this one. It's a hoot. You should play it. Alright, number 2, Final Fantasy 3. Well, I mean, you had a couple of different options here. You could play Final Fantasy 2, Final Fantasy 3, you had Chrono Trigger, Personally, I think Chrono Trigger is a better game, but this one's up there. This is probably one of my top 5 Super Nintendo games ever. I mean, really, what more can you say about this game? Great production, great presentation, so many memorable moments. Just a top-notch RPG from the best RPG maker of all time. It's number 2 on this one. You're going to be playing this one for a long time. This one has a lot of value to it. So enjoy it. If you've never played it before, you should, because it's one of the best first RPGs to get into. Even if it does have some pretty hard moments, this is one of the things, if you want to understand what people love the RPG franchise, genre, so much, this is the game to get into. Alright, and my pick for the best game on the entire SNES microconsole, miniature console, whatever you want to call it, gonna go with Earthbound. Why Earthbound? Because it's the most idiosyncratically weird and charming and unique and irreverent game Nintendo has probably ever made. This is a game where, I mean, by and large, it's a straightforward RPG, but the story is so good. The character development is so great. You know, the plot and the pacing and the structure and the plot twist are just so out there that it's absolutely unlike anything else out there on the Super Nintendo and really in all 16-bit gaming. It's just so quirky and so memorable and such a head trip. And there's so many things in this game that almost become sort of like meta-humorous, which makes it feel way, way ahead of its time. Just a great story. It's basically what would happen if Stephen King, back when he was on crack cocaine, wrote the script for Pokemon. That's pretty much all you need to know. It's a beautiful game with so many memorable moments. If you haven't played it before, you're missing an absolute masterpiece of gaming. For me, this is probably like the second best game released on Super Nintendo behind Chrono Trigger. Maybe the best overall game Nintendo's ever made, in my humble opinion, but that's just me talking. So there you go. So to recap, you've got 21 games on here. About 15 of them are really, really good to great, which you should definitely play. You probably have about 8 on here, which are absolute genre masterpieces, and you probably got about 2 or 3 that are like all-time classic, must-play genre, monoliths in Earthbound and Final Fantasy III. So all that to say, I really can't recommend you go out and play, or not play, when we go out and spend $80 on this whole unit. But if you do, I mean, not gonna lie, you're gonna get a lot of replay out of it, because these games are very, very good. I mean, Earthbound, Final Fantasy III alone are gonna give you months and months of gameplay. So you're not gonna be bored. I mean, there's a pretty good amount of diversity on here. So I'll applaud them for that, even though they're missing a lot of genres. There's no shoot 'em ups, there's no sports games on here, no beat 'em ups. That's another big omission. So I mean, we would be here all day. Probably take another video to talk about all the games that weren't included on the list. But the set list as is really good. Even though I really wish that'd include far, far more games, at least double what they have, because the technology is there. If you're going to sell it for $80, at least give us like 60 or 80 games, and not just 21 and ask us to be content with it. Alright, so after that, they'll probably do a Nintendo 64 console, but I really hope they do another one of these, like at least do an update with some of the more obscure games like Evo, the quest for, you ever play that Evo, the quest for Eden? Or the search for Eden, the quest for Eden, I think. Evo, the search for Eden, great, great game, great evolution sim. And of course UN Squadron and Space Megaforce and all the great games from Japan which never made it to the US. A lot of Fire Emblem games never made it over here. And actually, if you don't know about the Japanese version, they got a couple different games that get paneled upon, which is Tetris Attack, the best puzzle game released on the Super Nintendo. They get Super Soccer, kind of a mess soccer game. The Legend of the Mystical Ninja, which really isn't that great. And they get the first Fire Emblem game on the Super Nintendo, which is probably the worst of the 4 or 5 released, but still, if you're a fan of that, you should feel gypped. But overall, I think the US got the better offering because we get Earthbound and we get... There's another one that I think was really, really, really good. It was included on the Japanese release. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So, to conclude, I can't recommend spending $80 on this, but if you do, if you're lucky enough to get your hands on it, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff here, but I still think the overall product is a gem. I mean, it's one of those things where, seriously, all these games right now you can play literally right now for free without even having to download anything. So why would you go out and spend, an extra $80 of your precious income on something you can get for free? other than the fact of being able to play it on a TV in HD. I mean, if that's worth $80 for you, then it's worth $80 for you. But even then, I mean, they could have at least put in like an actual slot for the system, you know, because they have some Genesis retro console revivals. They actually have like a slot where you put real Genesis games in it. I mean, Nintendo could have at least done that and gone the Retron 3 route, but I don't know. That would maybe justify the $8 price tag, but I don't know, or at least have like some sort of like downloadable component to it. But yeah, just for what it is, it's a dedicated, you know, glorified plug-and-play console with 21 games. And to be fair, those 21 games, for the most part, are really, really good. But is it $80 good? In the eyes of this retro gaming enthusiast, not even close.